Marcus Aurelius never ran a race. He never threw a ball, trained in a gymnasium, or competed for a trophy. He spent his adult life managing an empire of 70 million people, fighting wars on multiple fronts, overseeing courts, and dealing with a plague that killed an estimated 5 million Romans. And yet, right now, in locker rooms and training facilities across professional sports, his words are being read, quoted, and applied by some of the most elite athletes on Earth. That is not a coincidence, and it is not simply a trend. It is the result of something deeply structural, a set of ideas so precisely aligned with what high performance actually demands that 2,000 years of distance between a Roman emperor and a modern quarterback have done almost nothing to reduce their relevance. To understand why this is happening, you have to start not with Marcus Aurelius, but with Epictetus, a philosopher who, unlike Marcus, had a direct and explicit relationship with athletic performance. Epictetus was born a slave in the 1st century AD and eventually became one of the most influential teachers of Stoic philosophy in the ancient world. He ran a school in Nicopolis, Greece, and was deeply preoccupied with a problem that every serious athlete will recognize immediately: the gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it. His students, he observed, could recite Stoic principles perfectly. They understood the theory. And then they went back to their lives and changed nothing. In response to this frustrating pattern, Epictetus turned consistently to athletic imagery. A published paper in the Journal of the Philosophy of Sport, authored by philosopher Michael Tremblay in 2021, documents this systematically. Epictetus used athletic metaphors as a central pedagogical tool, comparing philosophical progress to athletic training and virtue to Olympic victory, not as decoration, but as the structural core of how he taught. For Epictetus, achieving virtue and achieving athletic excellence were the same kind of pursuit. Both required daily repetition, deliberate discomfort, and the willingness to be measured not by intention, but by performance. One of the most striking passages in all of Epictetan literature comes from his Discourses, where he writes that when difficulties arrive, you should remember that you have been matched, like a wrestler with a rough opponent, and that this matching has a purpose. The purpose, he says, is to make you an Olympic victor, but that, he adds, cannot be done without sweat. This framing, difficulty as opponent, struggle as training, setback as preparation, is not motivational language. It is a precise philosophical position with real psychological implications. And it is the same position that modern sports psychology has arrived at through a completely different route. In 2022, Psychology Today published an analysis by sports psychologist Peter Haberl comparing the core principles of acceptance and commitment training, one of the most empirically supported frameworks in contemporary sports psychology, with the writings of Marcus Aurelius. The parallel is striking. ACT, developed by psychologists Stephen Hayes and Russ Harris and now widely used with Olympic and professional athletes, is built on the idea that performance degrades not when athletes feel pressure, anxiety, or self-doubt, but when they fight those feelings and try to suppress or eliminate them. The intervention is not to remove difficult thoughts, but to accept their presence while continuing to act in alignment with values. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in his private journals that were never intended for publication, "You have power over your mind, not over outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That sentence, written around 170 AD, is functionally indistinguishable from the foundational premise of ACT. The emperor and the sports psychologist arrived at the same place. One of them got there first by about 1,800 years. The scientific case for why Stoic principles work in athletic contexts goes beyond philosophy. A meta-analysis published by the National Institutes of Health, drawing on 127 studies covering 24,358 participants, found that psychological factors have a moderate but consistent association with athletic performance, with self-efficacy, an athlete's belief in their capacity to execute a specific task, showing one of the strongest effect sizes. What Stoic practice builds, at its core, is precisely this: a stable internal locus of evaluation that does not fluctuate with external results. When you train yourself, as the Stoics prescribe, to focus exclusively on what is within your control, effort, preparation, attention, response, and to accept without resistance everything outside it, you are building the psychological architecture that sports science identifies as the foundation of consistent high performance. You are not building indifference, you are building clarity. This is the distinction that matters most when you look at how elite athletes actually apply these ideas, because the popular understanding of Stoicism in sports tends to collapse into a crude version of "don't feel anything." That is not what the Stoics taught, and it is not what the best athletes practice. Tom Brady, who is documented as having studied Stoic principles under the influence of his performance coach Greg Harden, who also coached 23-time Olympic gold medalist Michael Phelps and Heisman Trophy winner Desmond Howard, has spoken publicly about his approach to adversity. His mental framework, as described in his own TB12 method and in multiple interviews, is organized around controlling responses rather than controlling outcomes. Brady has spoken about his practice of not letting emotions dictate decisions in high-pressure moments, not because he doesn't feel pressure, but because he has trained his response to it. This is Epictetus's dichotomy of control in practice, applied to a 2-minute drill with millions watching. The case of Naomi Osaka is even more instructive, because it goes beyond performance and into something the Stoics were equally serious about: the relationship between the athlete and public judgment. Osaka has been publicly vocal about the psychological toll of professional tennis, about the weight of expectation, media scrutiny, and the particular pressure of being both a global brand and a human being trying to play well. When she cited Stoic principles in interviews, she was not referencing them as a performance hack. She was referencing the Stoic position on what the philosophers called ta ektos, externals, reputation, public approval, other people's opinions. The Stoics were categorical. These things are not yours. They never were. The only domain that belongs to you is your own reasoned response. For an athlete operating at the intersection of social media, global fame, and competitive pressure, that distinction is not abstract philosophy. It is a survival framework. The bridge between the ancient gymnasium and the modern locker room was, in large part, built by a single book. Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way, published in 2014, drew directly on Stoic philosophy and applied it to performance, adversity, and competitive pressure. According to Sports Illustrated, the book spread rapidly through professional sports teams, coaches, and front offices in a way that few philosophy books ever have. NFL coaches embedded Epictetus in playbooks. The Seattle Seahawks, during their Super Bowl winning run, were reported to have engaged deeply with Stoic literature as part of their mental conditioning. The book did not introduce new ideas. It repackaged ancient ones in the language of performance. And what it found, consistently, was that the language fit perfectly, because the underlying structure of Stoic practice is the underlying structure of what competitive excellence has always required. That structure has 3 main pillars, and each of them maps directly onto what sports psychology now identifies as critical to elite performance. The first is the dichotomy of control, the disciplined daily practice of separating what you can influence from what you cannot, and investing your attention accordingly. In sports, this translates directly to process focus versus outcome focus, a distinction that is one of the most well-established predictors of performance consistency in the research literature. Athletes who attach their emotional state to outcomes, wins, losses, rankings, applause, experience more volatility and make worse decisions under pressure. Athletes who attach their attention to process, execution, preparation, response, perform more consistently over time and recover more quickly from setbacks. The Stoics did not invent this distinction, but they systematized it with more precision than anyone before or since. The second pillar is what Epictetus called ascesis, deliberate practice through voluntary discomfort. The Stoics believed that you cannot prepare for hardship in the abstract. You have to train yourself through actual contact with difficulty. This is the philosophical foundation behind what modern sports science calls stress inoculation. The practice of exposing athletes to controlled adversity, high-pressure simulations, and physically demanding conditions precisely so that the real thing, when it arrives, is already familiar. The body and mind have already been there. The opponent's noise, the final minute, the score that demands a comeback, if you've trained in conditions that approximate them, your nervous system does not treat them as emergencies. It treats them as familiar terrain. Epictetus compared this to the wrestler who has already sparred with a rough opponent. The match holds no surprises. The third pillar is what Marcus Aurelius practiced every single morning, journaling as a form of philosophical self-examination. His meditations are not a finished text. They are a working notebook, a record of a man in the world's most demanding job, holding himself accountable to his own principles one day at a time. Daily journaling is now one of the most commonly recommended practices among sports psychologists for exactly the same reason. It builds metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thought patterns, identify where you're losing mental ground, and course correct before a problem compounds. Marcus did not know what metacognition was as a clinical term. He practiced it more rigorously than almost anyone in recorded history. What makes all of this significant is not that a Roman emperor happened to write things that are also useful in sports. What makes it significant is what it reveals about the nature of performance itself. Excellence under pressure, whether in the arena of an empire or on a field with 60,000 people watching, has always made the same demands. It has always required the ability to act from values when emotion is pushing toward reaction. It has always required the ability to accept what cannot be changed without being paralyzed by it. It has always required the ability to find meaning and forward motion in difficulty rather than collapse inside it. These are not athletic skills, they are human skills. The Stoics spent 500 years developing the most rigorous framework ever produced for building them. Marcus Aurelius never played a sport, but what he understood, with a depth that modern performance science is still working to fully document, is that the arena you compete in is almost irrelevant. What determines the outcome is always the same thing: the quality and consistency of the mind you bring into it.